Everyone believed the most dangerous man in the city would notice if a stranger entered his mansion. They were wrong. What changed everything was not that he noticed her, but why she had come. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that true dignity is measured by sacrifice rather than wealth, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to Aaliyah Brooks. The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Community Hospital flickered softly as dawn struggled through the rain-streaked windows. The air carried the familiar scent of antiseptic and quiet exhaustion. In room 214, Denise Brooks lay motionless beneath a thin white blanket, her breathing shallow, her weathered hands resting over the hospital gown that had replaced the black maid's uniform she had worn almost every day for nearly 18 years. Beside her bed stood her 19-year-old daughter, Aaliyah Brooks. She held the carefully folded uniform against her chest, as though it were something far more valuable than fabric. The black dress had faded over the years, the cuffs worn smooth from countless hours of polishing marble floors and dusting chandeliers that belonged to people Denise would never truly know. A tiny stitch along one sleeve had come loose months earlier, but Denise had never found the time, or money, to replace it. "I'm sorry," Denise whispered, her voice barely louder than the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. "I should be there this morning." Aaliyah forced a smile that did little to hide the fear gathering behind her dark brown eyes. "You've never missed a day," she answered gently. "One day won't matter." But they both knew it would. Denise had spent nearly 2 decades cleaning one mansion without complaint. She had arrived before sunrise, left after sunset, and never once asked for favors. Missing work meant risking the only stable income they had left. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, silence settled between mother and daughter. Aaliyah glanced toward the neatly folded uniform once more. It seemed impossibly small now, carrying the weight of hospital bills, overdue rent, prescription costs, and years of quiet perseverance stitched into every thread. She looked back at her mother. "You need to rest." Denise reached for her wrist with trembling fingers. "You don't know that place." "I don't have to. You don't know the rules." "I'll follow yours." Denise's tired eyes shimmered with emotion. "Keep your head down." "I will." "Don't touch anything that isn't yours." "I won't." "And if something feels dangerous." Aaliyah squeezed her mother's hand before she could finish. "I'll come home." The older woman closed her eyes for a long moment, as though silently praying that promise would somehow protect her daughter from a world she herself had never understood. 20 minutes later, Aaliyah stepped into the hospital restroom carrying nothing except a worn backpack and the folded uniform. She carefully changed clothes. The sleeves were slightly too long. The shoes were half a size too big. When she tied the plain white apron around her waist, she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror. For the first time in her life, she looked exactly like her mother. Not because of the uniform, because of the quiet determination behind her eyes. Outside the hospital entrance, the rain had slowed to a fine mist. She boarded 2 buses across the city, passing neighborhoods where glass skyscrapers slowly replaced brick apartments, where luxury cars rolled silently through streets she had only ever seen from a distance. Every mile felt like crossing into another world. The final bus stopped beside towering wrought iron gates nearly 3 stories high. Beyond them stood an estate unlike anything Aaliyah had imagined. Stone walls stretched endlessly behind rows of ancient trees. Black luxury vehicles waited inside the circular driveway. Security cameras tracked every movement without making a sound. She tightened her grip around her mother's employee identification badge. For one day, just one day, if she could finish the shift, maybe the bills could wait another month. Maybe her mother could recover without worrying about losing everything they had worked so hard to keep. A uniformed security guard approached slowly. He looked at Denise's identification card, then at Aaliyah. His eyes lingered for only a second. Without another question, he pressed a button. With a slow mechanical groan, the enormous iron gates began to open. Aaliyah took one careful step forward, completely unaware that beyond those gates lived Ethan Kang, the Korean Mafia boss whose name was spoken across the city in whispers, and that before the sun set, one quiet act of love for her mother would change not only her own future, but the heart of the man everyone believed no kindness could ever reach. Some houses are built with marble. Others are built with fear. Ethan Kang's mansion was built with both. The iron gates closed behind Aaliyah Brooks with a heavy metallic groan that echoed longer than it should have. It sounded less like an entrance and more like a warning. She resisted the urge to look back. Her mother had taught her long ago that once you stepped into another person's world, especially one built on power, you respected their rules before your own curiosity. A black luxury sedan rolled silently across the circular driveway, disappearing beneath an archway supported by towering stone columns. Every surface reflected perfection. The gardens looked untouched by time. The fountains flowed with mathematical precision. Even the air seemed quieter inside the estate, as though every bird had learned when not to sing. Aaliyah tightened her grip on the cleaning supplies issued at the security checkpoint. She reminded herself she was only borrowing her mother's place. Just one day, one shift. Then she would return to the hospital before visiting hours ended. The massive oak doors opened before she reached them. An elderly woman dressed in an immaculate charcoal uniform stood waiting inside. Her silver hair was pulled into a flawless bun, and every movement carried the calm authority of someone who had spent decades keeping chaos invisible. "You must be Denise's daughter." Aaliyah nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret Whitmore." The older woman's eyes examined her from head to toe. Not cruelly, simply professionally. "Your mother called before dawn." Aaliyah lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry she couldn't come." Mrs. Whitmore offered the slightest nod. She has never apologized for missing work before today. Something inside Aaliyah tightened. Even after nearly 20 years of loyal service, Denise had still worried more about disappointing her employer than about lying in a hospital bed. "Come with me." The mansion seemed endless. Polished marble stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. Paintings older than entire cities covered the walls. Fresh flowers stood in enormous vases that probably cost more than everything inside Aaliyah's apartment combined. Yet despite the luxury, something felt strangely cold. No laughter, no music, only quiet footsteps and distant voices that immediately disappeared whenever someone walked past. Staff members moved almost soundlessly. Housekeepers, chefs, gardeners, security officers. Everyone worked with the same careful rhythm. Nobody lingered. Nobody whispered. Nobody looked comfortable. Mrs. Whitmore finally stopped beside a service hallway. "This house survives because everyone remembers 3 rules." She raised one finger. "You do not ask questions." A second finger. "You do not enter any room unless instructed." A third. "And if you see Mr. Kang." She paused just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable. "You step aside." Aaliyah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't greet him." "No, ma'am." "You don't try to impress him." "I won't." "You don't expect him to notice you." Mrs. Whitmore's expression remained unreadable. "That is how people stay employed here." The words settled heavily in the corridor. Not threatening, simply accepted, as though every employee had learned long ago that invisibility was the safest form of survival. Mrs. Whitmore handed Aaliyah a small schedule. Library first. The young woman entered the room carefully. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating shelves lined with thousands of leather-bound books. Dust barely existed. Still, every table was polished, every chair perfectly aligned. She worked slowly, treating each object with the same respect her mother always had. Hours passed. Nobody disturbed her. Occasionally, another employee crossed the hallway with lowered eyes before disappearing into another wing of the mansion. Near noon, while carrying fresh linens toward the upper corridor, Aaliyah noticed something unusual. Several security guards moved far quicker than before. A doctor carrying a leather medical case hurried across the second floor. 2 housekeepers exchanged worried glances before immediately pretending nothing had happened. Nobody spoke. Nobody explained. But the atmosphere had changed. The mansion no longer felt merely disciplined. It felt anxious. As Aaliyah reached the landing, she heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A child crying. She froze. The cry came again. Weak. Broken. Not the impatient cry of a spoiled child. It sounded frightened. Alone. She looked down the hallway. Every servant continued walking without reacting, almost as though they had trained themselves not to hear it. Aaliyah swallowed. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Keep your head down." Then another voice rose inside her. The one that had stayed awake beside her mother's hospital bed all night. No child should cry like that without someone checking. The sound came once more. Longer this time. More desperate. Aaliyah's eyes slowly drifted toward a large mahogany door at the end of the corridor. It stood slightly open, just enough for a thin strip of light to spill into the hallway, just enough for one frightened little voice to escape. Without realizing it, she took a single step toward the forbidden room. And somewhere else inside the mansion, Ethan Kang had just arrived home. The difference between obedience and courage is often measured by a single step. Aaliyah Brooks was about to take hers. The crying came again. Soft, broken, painfully small. It echoed through the long corridor like a sound that wasn't supposed to exist inside a mansion where every problem could supposedly be solved with money. Aaliyah remained frozen. Her fingers tightened around the folded bed linens until the fabric wrinkled beneath her grip. Every instinct told her to walk away. Mrs. Whitmore's warning repeated inside her head. Do not enter any room unless instructed. Another servant passed behind her carrying fresh towels. He heard the crying. She knew he did. His shoulders stiffened for the briefest moment before he continued walking without turning his head. No one stopped. No one asked questions. It was as if every employee had made an unspoken agreement that whatever happened beyond that mahogany door belonged to another world. Another cry. This one cracked halfway through before fading into exhausted silence. Aaliyah's heart sank. The sound reminded her of nights spent beside her mother's hospital bed, when Denise tried to hide her pain so her daughter would sleep. Some cries asked for attention. Others asked for help. She could no longer pretend she didn't know the difference. Slowly, almost against her own will, she placed the stack of linens onto a nearby console table. Her footsteps barely disturbed the polished wooden floor as she approached the half-open door. The closer she came, the quieter the hallway seemed to become. She gently pushed the door open. The room beyond looked nothing like the rest of the mansion. Gone were the dark woods and intimidating artwork. Warm sunlight filtered through sheer curtains decorated with painted clouds. Books lined one wall. Wooden trains rested beside handmade puzzles. A telescope stood near the window, aimed toward the gardens below. Yet despite the beauty surrounding him, one small figure curled tightly beneath a blanket in the corner of the room. The boy couldn't have been older than 8. His knees were pulled against his chest. His hands pressed hard over his ears. His entire body rocked back and forth in desperate rhythm. He wasn't crying anymore. He was trying not to. Aaliyah immediately recognized the signs. Years earlier, her church had organized weekend programs for children with developmental disabilities. She remembered one little boy who reacted the same way whenever the world became too loud. Nobody had taught her through expensive courses. She had simply learned by sitting quietly beside him until he felt safe enough to smile. She remained near the doorway. Not too close. Not too far. It's okay, she whispered, her voice softer than the breeze moving the curtains. The boy didn't answer. His breathing remained fast. His shoulders trembled violently. Aaliyah lowered herself onto the carpet, making herself smaller instead of approaching him. She remembered something else. Children overwhelmed by fear often watched movement before they trusted voices. Carefully, she picked up a small wooden windmill toy lying on the floor. She spun it gently between her fingers, round and round, slowly, without speaking again. Nearly a minute passed. Then another. Finally, the rocking slowed just enough for the little boy to peek through his fingers. Large dark eyes met hers for only a second before dropping back to the spinning toy. You're doing great, Aaliyah whispered. You don't have to be afraid. His breathing became slightly steadier. Outside the room, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. Someone shouted for another doctor. Someone else mentioned medication. No one entered. Perhaps they assumed the child had finally exhausted himself. Perhaps they feared making things worse. Inside the room, Aaliyah continued spinning the tiny wooden windmill. The room grew quieter. Then, almost imperceptibly, the little boy lowered one trembling hand from his ear. My head, he whispered. It hurts. The words were barely audible. Aaliyah's heart broke. It's too loud. He gave the smallest nod. So many voices. I know. She glanced toward the heavy curtains. Without making sudden movements, she stood and slowly closed them, dimming the sunlight. Then she silenced the ticking antique clock resting on the bookshelf. The room instantly felt calmer. When she sat back down, the boy's breathing had slowed even more. My name is Aaliyah. Silence. My mom always says names make strangers less scary. The corners of the boy's blanket shifted slightly. I'm Noah. His voice cracked with exhaustion. Hi, Noah. She smiled gently. I'm happy to meet you. For the first time since entering the room, the little boy looked directly at her. There was fear in his eyes, confusion, loneliness, but there was something else beginning to appear. Trust. A faint smile almost reached Aaliyah's face. Almost. Because before she could say another word, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed. Heavy footsteps approached with measured certainty. Not hurried, not uncertain, commanding. Every sound in the corridor stopped. Doors quietly closed. Conversations vanished. Even the security radios fell silent. Someone had arrived. The shadow of a tall man stretched slowly across the nursery floor before his polished black shoes appeared in the doorway. Aaliyah looked up. The room fell completely still. Ethan Kang, the Korean Mafia boss whose presence alone could silence an entire mansion, stood at the entrance. His tailored black suit was untouched by the rain outside. His expression revealed nothing. Dark eyes moved first to the frightened child, then to the young black Maid kneeling quietly on the floor beside him. Neither of them spoke, and in that suffocating silence, everyone waiting outside the room became certain they were about to witness a mistake that would cost someone everything. Power rarely announces itself with anger. Sometimes, it enters a room so quietly that even fear forgets how to breathe. No one moved. The silence that followed Ethan Kang's arrival felt heavier than the marble walls surrounding them. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to disappear. Standing in the doorway, Ethan surveyed the room without a word. His tailored black suit fit with effortless precision, every line sharp, every detail immaculate. Rain had darkened the shoulders of his overcoat, yet not a single strand of his neatly combed black hair appeared out of place. His expression remained unreadable, carved from years of discipline rather than emotion. To the outside world, Ethan Kang was a name spoken carefully. Businessmen lowered their voices when discussing him. Politicians pretended not to know him. Enemies rarely survived long enough to describe him. Inside this mansion, however, he was simply Mr. Kang, a man whose footsteps alone could bring an entire household to absolute silence. Outside the nursery, security officers had already gathered. Mrs. Whitmore stood several feet away, her usually composed face marked by genuine concern. Behind her waited 2 physicians and 3 senior staff members. None of them dared enter. Everyone understood the same thing. A servant had broken the rules, and Ethan Kang had witnessed it himself. Inside the room, Aaliyah slowly rose from the carpet. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs so loudly she wondered if everyone else could hear it. She lowered her eyes respectfully. I'm sorry, sir. Her voice was calm despite the fear tightening inside her chest. I heard him crying. Nothing. Ethan neither nodded nor answered. His gaze shifted past her toward the little boy sitting quietly beneath the blanket. Only moments earlier, Noah had been overwhelmed by panic. Now his breathing had steadied. The violent rocking had stopped. His trembling hands rested peacefully in his lap. Most surprising of all, he was watching Aaliyah instead of hiding from the room. One of the doctors finally gathered enough courage to speak. Mr. Kang. Ethan raised one finger without taking his eyes off Noah. The doctor immediately fell silent. The gesture lasted less than a second. It required no further explanation. Ethan stepped inside. His polished shoes crossed the wooden floor with measured confidence. Noah looked toward him. Unlike before, the boy did not panic. He simply reached for the small wooden windmill resting beside Aaliyah. Slowly, he spun it, round and round, exactly the way Aaliyah had shown him. For the first time that morning, Ethan's expression changed. Barely. A flicker, so slight that no one outside the room would have noticed. But something behind his eyes paused. He had spent years hiring specialists, child psychologists, private physicians, therapists flown in from overseas. Each possessed impressive credentials. Each had tried to comfort Noah during episodes like today's. None had managed to calm him this quickly. Yet somehow, a young black Maid wearing a borrowed uniform had accomplished it simply by sitting on the floor. Without medicine, without authority, without demanding anything in return. Ethan finally looked at Aaliyah. What is your name? His voice was low, controlled. Every syllable carried quiet authority. Aaliyah Brooks, sir. You work here. She hesitated. Only for a moment. Fear urged her to invent a simpler answer. To claim she had always been employed there. to avoid embarrassment. But her mother had taught her something long before teaching her how to polish silver. Never build tomorrow on today's lie. I'm only here because my mother became sick this morning. She swallowed. I came to finish her shift. Mrs. Whitmore lowered her head. She had expected the confession to end badly. Instead, Ethan simply continued looking at the young woman. You entered this room knowing it was against the rules. Yes, sir. You still entered. Yes. Why? The question lingered in the room. No accusation. Only curiosity. Aaliyah looked briefly toward Noah. The little boy had begun turning the windmill again. Its wooden blades caught the afternoon sunlight, spinning quietly between his fingers. She answered without thinking. Because he sounded like someone who didn't need another rule. He sounded like someone who needed someone to stay. Silence. A different silence now. Not one created by fear. One created by unexpected truth. No one outside the nursery dared breathe. The doctors exchanged uncertain glances. Even Mrs. Whitmore found herself staring at the young woman. Years of experience had taught her exactly how conversations with Ethan Kang usually unfolded. This one was different. Very different. Ethan slowly turned back toward Noah. The child looked up and spoke so softly that only those inside the room could hear. Can she stay? Every person standing outside expected Ethan's answer before he even opened his mouth. The maid would apologize. Security would escort her out. Another employee would replace her before sunset. That was how powerful men maintained order. But Ethan Kang continued watching the frightened little boy who had not willingly spoken to a stranger in weeks. Then he looked once more at Aaliyah Brooks. For the first time in many years, the most feared man in the city found himself questioning not what rule had been broken, but whether the rule had ever deserved to exist in the first place. The strongest people are not always those who command others. Sometimes, they are the ones who quietly carry burdens no one else can see. The nursery remained wrapped in an almost sacred silence. Outside the door, no one dared interrupt. Inside, Noah continued turning the small wooden windmill between his fingers. The rhythmic movement had become steady now, almost peaceful. His shoulders, which had been trembling only minutes earlier, finally relaxed against the oversized armchair. Ethan Kang watched his nephew with quiet disbelief. For nearly 3 months, Noah had spoken only when absolutely necessary. Since losing his parents in a tragic accident, the little boy had retreated into a world that even the finest specialists struggled to reach. Every unfamiliar voice frightened him. Every sudden sound overwhelmed him. Every new face was another reason to hide. Yet somehow, today, he had asked one person to stay. Ethan slowly shifted his attention back to Aaliyah. You said your mother works here. Yes, sir. For how long? Aaliyah lowered her eyes respectfully. I think, 18 years. You think? A faint, embarrassed smile appeared on her face. I was very little when she started. I only remember waiting for her after school, because she always came home after dark. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only simple honesty. Ethan studied her carefully. She wasn't dressed like someone hoping to impress anyone. The borrowed uniform was slightly too large across the shoulders. The sleeves had been folded twice. One shoe carried a small scratch near the toe that had clearly been repaired instead of replaced. Nothing about her appearance suggested comfort. Everything suggested responsibility. What happened to your mother? She collapsed yesterday evening. The words came quietly. She tried to hide the pain because she didn't want to miss work. Mrs. Whitmore lowered her gaze. She remembered Denise insisting she was only tired, even when her hands trembled while polishing silver. Even when climbing the staircase had become difficult, Denise had never once complained. Aaliyah continued. The doctors say she'll recover. She paused. Her voice softened. Need time. Ethan waited. She did not finish the sentence. She didn't mention money. She didn't ask for help. She didn't plead. Instead, she simply looked toward Noah, making sure he remained calm before speaking again. I only wanted my mother to rest without worrying she'd lose her job. The words settled over the room with unexpected weight. One of the physicians quietly looked away. Another adjusted his glasses, pretending to study Noah's chart. Even Mrs. Whitmore felt something tighten inside her chest. For years, she had supervised dozens of employees. Many requested advances. Others negotiated salaries. Some complained endlessly. Denise Brooks had done none of those things. Neither had her daughter. Ethan walked slowly toward the large windows overlooking the estate. Beyond the glass, gardeners trimmed ancient hedges with mathematical precision. Luxury vehicles rested motionless beneath the covered driveway. Everything outside reflected order, control, power. Yet behind him stood a 19-year-old girl who had crossed the city wearing her sick mother's uniform simply because she believed responsibility mattered more than comfort. Without turning around, Ethan asked another question. "What were you doing before today?" Aaliyah hesitated. "I was studying." "What did you study?" "Nursing." The answer surprised everyone. Even Mrs. Whitmore looked up. "You left school last semester." "Why?" This time the silence lasted longer. Not because she wanted sympathy. Because speaking the truth aloud somehow made it more real. "My mother couldn't work as much anymore. I thought I could go back after she got better." A tiny smile touched her lips. "I still hope I can." Noah suddenly tugged gently on her sleeve. "Don't go." His voice was barely above a whisper. Aaliyah immediately knelt beside him again. "I'm still here." The little boy leaned back against his chair, comforted simply by hearing those words. Ethan noticed everything. The instinctive way she lowered herself to Noah's eye level. The patience in her movements. The absence of panic. She never treated the child as a problem that needed fixing. She simply stayed. Years of negotiations had taught Ethan how to recognize people driven by ambition. Years of surviving betrayal had taught him how to recognize manipulation. Nothing about Aaliyah resembled either. She had not entered the nursery hoping to be noticed. In fact, she had expected to lose everything by walking through that door. Yet she had done it anyway. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because somewhere inside her, compassion outweighed fear. Ethan finally turned back toward the room. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but something deep within him had shifted. Very few people ever impressed Ethan Kang. Even fewer surprised him. This young woman had managed both without realizing it. He looked toward Mrs. Whitmore. "Make sure someone drives Miss Brooks back to the hospital when her shift ends." "Yes, sir." And the room waited. "Tell accounting not to deduct today's wages from Denise Brooks." Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Sir." "She worked today." His eyes rested briefly on Aaliyah. She simply wore a different face. No one spoke. Not because they feared him, but because, for the first time in years, they had witnessed Ethan Kang make a decision that sounded less like the order of a mafia boss, and more like the quiet judgment of a man who had just remembered what kindness looked like. The truth about a person's character is rarely found in a single conversation. It is hidden in the ordinary days that no one thinks are worth remembering. By the time Aaliyah Brooks left the mansion that evening, the rain had stopped. The driver Mrs. Whitmore had assigned waited patiently outside the hospital entrance while Aaliyah thanked him and hurried through the sliding glass doors carrying nothing except her backpack and the borrowed uniform folded carefully over one arm. She never imagined that after watching the elevator doors close behind her, Ethan Kang quietly gave an order that had nothing to do with business. "Bring me Denise Brooks' employment file." The request surprised Mrs. Whitmore. She had managed the household staff for more than 25 years. Never, not once, had Ethan asked to see the complete file of an ordinary housekeeper. "Immediately, sir." "Tonight." Within half an hour, a thick brown folder rested on the polished walnut desk inside Ethan's private study. The room was lined with dark bookshelves reaching toward the ceiling, illuminated only by the warm glow of a brass reading lamp. Rainwater still traced slow paths across the tall windows overlooking the sleeping gardens. Ethan opened the file. The first page contained nothing remarkable. Employee name, Denise Brooks. Position, housekeeper. Employment duration, 18 years. Below that were attendance records. He turned another page, then another. His eyes gradually slowed. 1 year, 2 years, 5, 10, 18. Every page told the same quiet story. Almost perfect attendance. No disciplinary actions. No complaints. No requests for special treatment. No missing inventory. No damaged property. No unexplained absences. Only small handwritten notes added over the years by previous supervisors. Stayed late without overtime after the winter storm. Covered another employee's shift without being asked. Returned a diamond bracelet discovered beneath a guest room dresser. Refused reward money. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He had reviewed executives with far shorter records and far greater salaries. Few possessed resumes this clean. He continued reading. Another note caught his attention. Employee consistently declines financial assistance. States, if I haven't earned it, it doesn't belong to me. The words lingered in the silence. They sounded strangely familiar. Not because he had heard Denise speak them, because her daughter had lived them that very afternoon. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Mrs. Whitmore entered carrying a second, thinner folder. You asked for information regarding Miss Brooks. Ethan accepted it. Unlike Denise's file, Aaliyah's contained almost nothing. No employment records. No disciplinary history. Only a brief report compiled after the day's events. Near the back rested a folded document. A college transcript. Nursing? Ethan asked quietly. Mrs. Whitmore nodded. I contacted the university after speaking with her. Why? I was curious. Ethan unfolded the transcript. Every semester showed excellent grades. Mostly A's. Several instructors had written recommendations praising her compassion during clinical training. Then, the record stopped. No graduation. No final semester. Only a withdrawal notice dated 4 months earlier. Reason? Mrs. Whitmore answered softly. Unpaid tuition. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Outside, wind brushed gently against the windows. Ethan stared at the transcript longer than necessary. He remembered Aaliyah kneeling on the nursery floor. The confidence with which she had calmed Noah. The instinctive understanding she displayed. She had not learned those things by accident. She had been preparing to spend her life caring for others. Until life demanded she care for her own family first. Mrs. Whitmore quietly placed one final envelope on the desk. I believe you should see this as well. Inside was a photocopy of several hospital invoices. Medication, emergency treatment, cardiac examinations. Amounts circled repeatedly in blue ink. Nothing had been paid. Ethan closed the envelope without another word. His gaze drifted toward the city lights beyond the estate. How many times had Denise polished these very floors while hiding chest pain from everyone around her? How many mornings had she smiled politely despite knowing she could barely afford the medicine keeping her alive? And how many evenings had Aaliyah quietly abandoned her own dreams so her mother would never have to face those burdens alone? Neither woman had asked for pity. Neither had demanded fairness. They had simply continued working, continued sacrificing, continued protecting each other. The realization settled over Ethan with unexpected weight. His organization spent millions each year securing loyalty through contracts, bonuses, and fear. Yet somewhere beyond these walls lived 2 women whose loyalty had never been purchased. It had been chosen, quietly. Every single day, Ethan reached for his phone. He stared at it for several moments before speaking. Prepare the car. Mrs. Whitmore looked up. Tonight, sir? Yes. Where would you like the driver to take you? Ethan closed Denise's employment file with slow, deliberate care. His voice remained calm. The hospital. He stood and buttoned his jacket. I think it's time I met the woman who spent 18 years serving this house. He paused, his eyes lingering on the neatly stacked files that had revealed more truth than any conversation ever could. While we never truly saw her at all. Some debts cannot be repaid with money. They can only be answered with respect. The hallways of St. Mary's Community Hospital were unusually quiet that evening. Most visitors had already gone home. Nurses moved gently between patient rooms, speaking in lowered voices that blended with the steady rhythm of heart monitors and distant footsteps. Few people noticed the black sedan that stopped beneath the emergency entrance. Even fewer recognized the man who stepped out. Ethan Kang wore no tailored overcoat this time. No security detail surrounded him. Only one driver remained outside, as Ethan walked through the automatic glass doors carrying nothing in his hands. Power had always entered rooms before him. Tonight, he entered as quietly as any ordinary visitor. The receptionist looked up. May I help you, sir? I'm here to see Denise Brooks. She checked the room number. 2nd floor. Room 214. Thank you. The elevator ride lasted less than a minute. Yet for Ethan, it felt strangely unfamiliar. Hospitals had never been places he lingered. His world revolved around negotiations, private meetings, guarded estates, and decisions measured in millions. This building measured life differently. Here, success was another heartbeat, another breath, another sunrise. When he reached room 214, the door stood slightly open. Inside, Denise Brooks slept peacefully beneath the thin hospital blanket. The exhaustion on her face remained visible even in sleep. Years of hard work had carved quiet lines around her eyes. Her hands rested above the blanket, rough from countless years spent cleaning surfaces most people admired without ever wondering who polished them. Beside the window sat Aaliyah. She had changed back into her ordinary clothes. An old gray sweater, faded jeans. A notebook rested open on her lap. Not a diary, a nursing textbook. She wasn't reading. She had fallen asleep while studying, one hand still holding a pen. Ethan remained outside the doorway. Neither woman noticed him. For the first time in many years, he simply observed. No expensive jewelry, no luxury handbags, no complaints. Only a daughter who spent her evening reviewing anatomy notes while waiting for her mother to wake. He quietly knocked. Aaliyah looked up immediately. The surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. Mr. Kang. She quickly stood. I didn't expect. You don't need to apologize. His calm voice interrupted her gently. It's visiting hours. She glanced toward her sleeping mother. I didn't want to wake her. You didn't. He stepped inside. The room suddenly felt much smaller than the grand offices where Ethan usually met people. There were no marble floors, no crystal chandeliers, only 2 plastic chairs, 1 hospital bed, a single vase containing flowers that had already begun to wilt. His eyes settled briefly on the stack of unpaid medical invoices resting near the window, exactly where Mrs. Whitmore had said they would be. Aaliyah instinctively tried to move them out of sight. I'm sorry. Ethan looked at her. For what? She hesitated. They're personal. He nodded once. I know. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. Finally, Ethan spoke. I reviewed your mother's employment record. Aaliyah's expression changed. She immediately worried something had gone wrong. Did she make a mistake? No. His answer came without hesitation. Not once. The young woman lowered her eyes. A small smile appeared despite herself. I told her that. Ethan looked toward Denise. 18 years. Yes. She never asked this household for anything. Aaliyah quietly answered. She always said respect means earning your place, not demanding one. Those words landed with surprising force. Ethan understood now where Aaliyah's quiet strength had come from. It had been taught, not through speeches, through example. He reached inside his jacket and placed a simple cream-colored envelope on the bedside table. Aaliyah frowned slightly. What is it? Your mother's hospital expenses. She looked confused. I don't understand. They've been paid. Her eyes widened. What? In full. For a long moment, she simply stared at him. Then at the envelope. Then back again. You don't have to. I know. The room fell silent. Again she searched for words. We can't repay that. Ethan looked at Denise before answering. I'm not asking you to. Another long pause followed. He continued. Tomorrow morning, accounting will also continue paying your mother's salary while she recovers. Aaliyah shook her head almost immediately. No. The answer surprised him. You shouldn't. Why not? Because she isn't working. Ethan studied her face. There was no false pride. Only the same honesty he had already seen twice before. We didn't earn money we didn't work for. A slow breath escaped him. Most people would have accepted immediately. Some would have demanded more. This young woman was trying to refuse help she desperately needed. Not because she doubted him. Because she believed dignity mattered more than desperation. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. Small. Almost invisible. The salary isn't charity. Aaliyah listened carefully. It is payment for 18 years during which your mother gave this house far more loyalty than it ever properly acknowledged. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. Not loud tears. Quiet ones. The kind that arrive only after someone finally recognizes years of invisible sacrifice. Ethan reached into his jacket one final time. This time he placed a second envelope beside the first. What is this? An employment offer. She blinked. For me. You won't replace your mother. He looked directly into her eyes. You'll begin where you belong. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a position unlike anything she had expected. Resident Family Care Coordinator. Flexible hours. Full salary. Medical benefits. And one final line near the bottom. Educational expenses for completion of your nursing degree will be fully sponsored. Aaliyah's hands trembled. She looked up speechless. Ethan's voice remained calm. I am not offering this because I pity you. He paused. I'm offering it because Noah trusted you. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. And because people who choose compassion when no one is watching are the rarest people any house can ever hope to keep. Real change is never announced by speeches. It reveals itself in the small moments when people begin treating one another differently. 3 weeks passed. Summer sunlight gradually replaced the endless rain that had blanketed the city for days. The gardens surrounding Ethan Kang's estate bloomed with fresh color, and the mansion, once defined by perfect silence, seemed to breathe a little easier. The changes were subtle at first, almost invisible, until everyone realized they were no longer accidents. On Monday morning, Mrs. Whitmore gathered the household staff inside the grand service hall before the beginning of their shifts. More than 40 employees stood quietly in neat rows. Housekeepers, gardeners, drivers, chefs, maintenance workers. Many had served the estate for years, some for decades. Everyone expected another briefing about security or protocol. Instead, Mrs. Whitmore unfolded a single sheet of paper. These are Mr. Kang's new household policies. Several employees exchanged curious glances. The older housekeeper adjusted her glasses and began reading. Effective immediately, every full-time employee and their immediate family members will receive comprehensive medical coverage. The room fell silent. No one reacted. Not because they weren't surprised. Because they weren't sure they had heard correctly. Mrs. Whitmore continued. No employee will lose wages because of medically documented illness. A cook near the back slowly looked toward one of the gardeners. Neither spoke. Both simply stared. An educational assistance program has also been established for employees or their children who wish to continue their studies. Someone quietly inhaled. Another servant blinked several times as though trying to wake from a dream. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore lowered the paper. These changes are effective today. Questions filled every face. None reached anyone's lips. The meeting ended. Yet the conversations began immediately afterward. What happened? Why now? Did someone complain? Mrs. Whitmore overheard the whispers, but offered only one answer. Sometimes. She looked toward the staircase leading to the private family wing. One act of kindness teaches an entire house something it should have known long ago. Across the estate, Aaliyah Brooks had quietly begun her new position. She no longer wore the traditional maid's uniform. Instead, she dressed simply in navy slacks and a light blue blouse, carrying a small notebook filled with Noah's daily routines, therapy schedules, favorite books, and observations recommended by his physicians. Nothing about her work resembled authority. She never gave orders. She listened. She encouraged. She noticed. Every morning, Noah waited for her in the library before breakfast. Some days they read together. Other mornings they built model airplanes or completed puzzles overlooking the gardens. The frightened little boy who once hid beneath blankets now occasionally smiled. Not often, but enough for everyone to notice. Even the specialists who continued visiting the mansion struggled to explain the transformation. One afternoon, while walking through the east corridor, Ethan paused outside the music room. The door remained slightly open. Inside, Noah sat at the piano. His fingers hesitated above the keys. "I'll make mistakes," he whispered. Aaliyah smiled gently from beside him. "Then we'll make them together." The boy laughed. A quiet laugh. Small, but unmistakably real. Ethan remained standing in the hallway. He did not interrupt. For several moments, he simply listened as uncertain piano notes slowly became a simple melody. Mrs. Whitmore quietly approached behind him. I haven't heard him laugh since before the accident. Neither had Ethan. He watched as Noah looked proudly toward Aaliyah after finishing the final note. She applauded exactly once. Not dramatically, just enough to let him know he had done well. The boy's smile widened. Mrs. Whitmore glanced toward Ethan. "I believe you've given them both something valuable." Ethan shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No." His voice remained calm. "They earned it." Later that week, another change quietly spread through the mansion. One by one, employees stopped referring to Aaliyah as the new girl. The gardeners greeted her each morning. The kitchen staff set aside tea for her before she visited the hospital after work. Drivers offered rides without being asked. Even security officers who once barely acknowledged household employees now held doors open whenever she passed. Respect had replaced habit. Not because Ethan demanded it, because people had witnessed character with their own eyes. Meanwhile, Denise Brooks continued recovering steadily. Each afternoon after finishing work, Aaliyah still visited room 214 with fresh flowers gathered from the mansion's gardens. She never mentioned Ethan's generosity first. She always spoke about Noah's progress, about his first full conversation, his first piano lesson, his first genuine smile. Denise listened proudly. You've helped that little boy. Aaliyah smiled softly. I think. She paused thoughtfully. He helped all of us. Back at the estate, dusk settled over the gardens as Ethan stood alone beneath the stone balcony overlooking the fountain. The mansion looked exactly as it always had. The same marble, the same gates, the same walls. Yet something fundamental had changed. Not the building, the people inside it. For years, he had believed loyalty could be protected by strict rules. Now he understood something entirely different. People gave their best not when they were afraid of losing everything, but when they finally felt that their own dignity had been seen. The greatest victories are not won in boardrooms or battlefields. They are won in the quiet moments when a human being finally feels seen. Autumn arrived with cool morning air and golden leaves drifting across the stone pathways of Ethan Kang's estate. Nearly 3 months had passed since the day Aaliyah Brooks had walked through the mansion's gates wearing her mother's faded maid uniform. So much had changed, yet one promise still remained unfinished. On a bright Monday morning, a familiar black sedan stopped outside St. Mary's Community Hospital. This time, it wasn't arriving for an emergency. It was bringing someone home. Denise Brooks stepped carefully through the hospital entrance, moving slower than before, but with renewed strength in every step. Aaliyah walked beside her, one arm gently supporting her mother while trying not to smile too widely. You don't have to hold me so tightly, Denise teased softly. I know. Aaliyah laughed. I just want to. The driver opened the rear door. Neither woman spoke during the journey. As the mansion slowly appeared beyond the towering iron gates, Denise stared through the window in silence. I never thought I'd come back. Aaliyah reached for her mother's hand. You always deserved to. The gates opened. This time, they no longer looked frightening, only welcoming. As the car rolled into the circular driveway, something unexpected happened. Nearly every member of the household staff stood waiting outside the entrance. Housekeepers lined one side of the steps. Gardeners stood beside them. Chefs emerged from the kitchen entrance. Drivers removed their caps respectfully. Even the security officers stood at attention. Denise looked at Aaliyah in confusion. What is all this? I don't know. Mrs. Whitmore walked forward first. For years, she had greeted Denise each morning with little more than a professional nod. Today was different. She smiled warmly. Welcome home. Not, welcome back to work. Simply, welcome home. One by one, employees stepped forward. Some shook Denise's hand. Others quietly thanked her for years of kindness they had never properly acknowledged. One young gardener admitted she had once stayed late helping him clean after he accidentally damaged a flower bed. A cook recalled Denise secretly bringing homemade soup when his wife had fallen ill. A driver smiled as he remembered her giving her own lunch away to a temporary employee who had forgotten his. Small moments. Forgotten by Denise. Remembered by everyone else. Tears slowly gathered in her eyes. I only did what anyone would have done. Mrs. Whitmore gently shook her head. No. You did what very few people continue doing for 18 years. The front doors opened. Ethan Kang stepped outside. He wore his usual dark suit. His posture remained calm, confident. Yet there was nothing intimidating about the way he approached. He stopped directly before Denise. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan extended his hand. Denise instinctively accepted it. Welcome back, Mrs. Brooks. She smiled nervously. Thank you, Mr. Kang. He looked toward the folded uniform resting carefully over her arm. The same faded black uniform she had worn for nearly 2 decades. The house has changed. Denise glanced toward the employees gathered behind him. I can see that. Ethan nodded once. But there is one thing that won't. He looked directly at her. This house will always remember who helped build it. Silence settled over the courtyard. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Simply meaningful. Denise slowly unfolded the old maid's uniform. She ran her fingers gently across the worn sleeve that Aaliyah had stitched years earlier. Then she turned toward her daughter. I think. She smiled through quiet tears. It's your turn now. Carefully, she placed the folded uniform into Aaliyah's hands. Not because Aaliyah would wear it again. She never would. The uniform had become something greater than work clothes. It had become a symbol. of sacrifice, of honesty, of quiet love carried without expectation of applause. Aaliyah hugged it tightly before embracing her mother. Neither woman noticed that many of the staff quietly wiped tears from their own eyes. Even Noah came running across the courtyard, carrying the same small wooden windmill that had rested on the nursery floor the day everything changed. He stopped in front of Aaliyah with a bright smile. "I fixed it." She knelt to his level. "It spins even better now." "So do I." The little boy grinned proudly before taking Denise's hand. "Come see my piano." Everyone laughed softly, even Ethan, only for a moment, but it was enough. As Noah led Denise inside, the courtyard slowly emptied. Employees returned to their duties. The fountain continued flowing beneath the afternoon sun. Golden leaves drifted across the marble steps, where fear had once ruled every conversation. Ethan remained outside for a few moments longer. Aaliyah joined him quietly. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Finally, Ethan looked toward the mansion where laughter now echoed faintly through open windows. "I spent years protecting this house." He said it almost to himself. "But I nearly forgot what a home was supposed to protect." Aaliyah followed his gaze. "People." He nodded. "People." The afternoon breeze carried the sound of Noah laughing once. Again, it drifted through the gardens like music no architect could ever design and no fortune could ever purchase. And on that ordinary autumn day, beneath the same sky that had watched a frightened young woman borrow her mother's uniform only months before, everyone present understood a truth that would outlive every wall surrounding the estate. Respect was never created by power. It was earned through humility. And that day, the mansion and everyone inside it remembered what dignity truly looks like.